study, and board member Bate also let us know that he will not be attending the study session, but will be attending virtually due to personal reasons. So we can go ahead and get started. Thanks, Logan.
Terrific. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, or this afternoon at least. Alan and I have been asked to talk about Title I school resource allocation and teacher salaries. Previously, I had sent board members some additional information regarding this topic. So we're going to go over a brief overview of that information along with a few additional details. But what we're going to cover from the requested information is an overview of relevant research, as well as comparison data to other districts in the nearby vicinity, as well as what current allocations look like, processes and procedures that we have going on here in Salt Lake. In terms of the research on the topic is greatly mixed. The study I have, an image of before you about effective teacher retention bonuses, as well as a companion project, research project in Dallas Independent School District, both show that a $5,000 bonus that was given to highly effective teachers did help to retain teachers into those schools, in particular in those Title I schools. Challenges with that were recognized in both of those studies had to do with ongoing funding availability and the educator evaluation systems themselves on how you identify who the effective teachers are. And what the impact was is they found that it only impacted the core assessed teachers, and so there was mixed data in relation to anybody who was not teaching in a core assessed area, such as PE or any arts or anything outside of language arts, math, and science. And so the research results were inconclusive in those other areas, but it did show that with a significant bonus of $5,000 or more, they did have improved retention for the short term of that study. There's another research article we made available about teacher transfer incentives. This one is very similar to what the state legislature had done last year in approving a pilot program about teacher merit pay. Excuse me, thank you, Dr. Graham, for helping out on that. Teacher merit pay. And what this research project showed was that this particular research article spanned 10 different districts in 7 different states. And what they were aiming to do was identify who the highest performing teachers were that were able to raise student achievement and be considered value added. And those teachers were offered $20,000 to move to Title I school. And so what the research results showed was that over the course of the 2-year pilot, it did in fact attract teachers into those schools, and it did have a positive impact on both math and reading scores in elementary. They did not see any impact in student performance in the middle school, but for the time being that this large stipend of $20,000 to move into those schools, they did have noticeable movement and noticeable retention. I would question, however, any retention span that just looks at a 2-year span. And so there's question there that, like, obviously $20,000 is going to raise some eyebrows and get some attention, but the ongoing challenge is where does the funding come from if you're going to be able to be sustainable in a project of that scale. Other research that we looked at, this one that's pictured here, as well as another one from Denver Public Schools that were very similar in scope, they showed that by providing higher salaries to teachers in Title I schools also had a positive impact on teacher retention. They were really specifically looking at what it would take to retain teachers, independent of whether or not they were looking specifically at student growth or the teacher's individual effectiveness through a performance metric of any kind of that sort. So what those 2 studies showed was that through having higher salaries, they did see a 12% increase in their teacher retention at those schools. In comparison to what our neighboring districts are doing around the state, or at least in the Wasatch Front here, we've found that Granite School District as well as Jordan School District do both provide an additional salary for teachers specifically working in Title I schools. As you can see, Granite School District provides a $1,000 stipend. Jordan School, actually the $1,000 annual stipend is part of their salary schedule. The difference in Jordan School District is that Jordan School District provides two $750 stipends that are not included on their salary schedule, but included as an additional, it's a two-time bonus throughout the year in two $750 increments. But our neighbors in Canyons, Murray, and Davis all said that they do not have any kind of differentiated pay for teachers in Title I schools. My colleague in Murray did confess that they had done so in Murray a few years back and said that they ran into several problems and pulled that back and just no longer do it. And so he didn't elaborate much on what the problems were, other than they created a division amongst their ESP, their essential school personnel staff, and the teaching staff of the schools, where teachers were eligible for these stipends, but anybody else was not, and it created a large division, and that was part of the rationale as to why they pulled back that incentive. I also want to highlight on some things that are happening nationally to help educators in high poverty schools or in Title I schools. This is something I deal with on a daily basis, signing public service loan forgiveness or teacher loan forgiveness verifications. So teachers previously, before this was expanded in the last 5 years, you had to teach in a Title I school and teach a high needs, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, subject area of math, science, or special education. You were eligible for up to $5,000 loan forgiveness. About 5 years ago, that all changed, and now teachers are eligible for a $17,500 loan forgiveness, so a substantial increase to that, which is a good incentive for teachers to work in Title I schools. This money is available for anybody working in a Title I school, and so if you have federal student loans, they can be forgiven. And so, like I said, these cross my desk almost every single day of the year, which is a great program, meaning that many of our employees here in Salt Lake City School District are taking advantage of this. And it is attracting both new career educators as well as career educators who are going back for additional higher degrees, so master's or doctorate degrees. The loan forgiveness can be good for both. Another program I want to point out that we're doing here in-house is our peer assistance and review program. This is local to Salt Lake City School District, and back in 2013, the board was gracious enough to fully fund this program, where we have 5 consulting teachers whose full-time job it is to go out and mentor and support brand new educators. I bring this up because with the advent of our peer assistance and review program, one metric that we like to look at in terms of what the program's success is our teacher retention. In the first 5 years of the program, we were able to be above the state average in 5-year teacher retention rate by 23%. Since COVID has happened, those numbers are really difficult to measure anymore, so I don't have firm data on that. But for the first 8 years of the program, beating the state average 5-year teacher retention rate by 23% was pretty significant and a good reason to keep going. So we do have good things happening that are helping with retention in our Title I schools, which I would like to say is also helping with retention in all of our schools. So we have some good programs that are in place. Could things get better? Certainly they can. But there are positive things happening here, right, in our fair city. I can't talk, in our fair city. So I want to turn this over to Alan to explain a little bit of how current Title I spending is happening.
So since we're talking Title I schools, I just threw up, here's the actual grants for current year for our Title I schools, the actual Title I money. And you can see I listed how our Title I schools, this is just for our Title I elementary schools, are using their Title I funds. See, they're all using it for teachers. I think they're using it to lower class sizes, add additional FTE to help bring those class sizes down. In addition, you see Edison paying for behavior specialists, and then a good chunk of them also hire paraprofessionals with their Title I money. So this slide is simply to show how our school is using their Title I funds. In addition, if you remember back from our discussion of school allocations, we also allocate additional property tax revenue and at-risk money to Title I schools based on English language learner and for introduced lunch counts. Because those monies are just kind of mixed with other allocations, not as easy for me to say how are they spending it. So I don't have a slide to show that because it's just all mixed in. If you remember from that presentation, next year we will be breaking out the at-risk funding from the regular, just so we will be able to monitor exactly how they're using that. But those are additional resources we're also sending out to our Title I schools. Next slide.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So on Mountain View, the showing
Go back.
counselor, do they have an additional counselor? Because
Yes.
counselors are fully funded, right? So
Yes,
they're-
so they've said with our Title I money, we want more counselors, so we're gonna fund
I believe it's a 0.5.
probably a 0.5.
For years, Mountain View has shared a point. They've shared a counselor between Mountain View and Glendale, so each of the two schools picking up 0.5 of that person's contract.
Plus what's allocated.
That's correct.
Right.
Logan. I guess going back one. The peer assistance and review, are those only allocated to Title I schools?
No, that's for any teacher who's new to the profession.
So you've only got 5,
That's correct.
and how many new teachers do we have roughly?
Anywhere, this year has been probably our lowest number, and we have about 35, but it ranges anywhere from 35 to 65. And I'm talking brand new teachers, so we hire on average 150 to 180 teachers into the district, but most of the teachers that we hire are coming with career experience. So peer assistance and review for the new educator part of the model is specifically for people who are brand new to teaching and never taught before, either through an ARL or associate licensure route or straight out of college through a traditional teaching program.
And the question I have on the top of my head, that's 5 for that many new individuals, and then presume there's in-building support as well, but has there been any kind of analysis on if these people are spread too thin?
No, actually, I feel like we're adequately staffed for PAR. I've been over this program since its inception, and so I think that PAR is currently sufficiently staffed. Thank you.
All right. So I just threw up some cost estimates on, if you were to do a differentiated pay for various different scenarios and estimated how that would cost. Let's say you extended the teaching day by 30 extra minutes. And again, this is taking the Title I teachers that are in those schools right now. So the total cost of that would be just over $2 million. If the option was to pay them for an additional day. So one additional day is 178,000. And then looking at maybe it's 4 additional days, so then the next line is just that times 4. If you paid them $1,000 stipend, 374,000. If it was a $5,000 stipend, $1.8 million, and a 10,000, just keep ramping that up, because at what point does an additional stipend actually change behavior? I don't know that $1,000 keeps people in Title I school if they don't want to be in Title I school. $10,000 might change behavior, but you can see that's $3.7 million that would be invested in that type of program. So, as we have these discussions, it's like, those are kind of some estimated costs, and it's like, is that where we would want to spend our money, or is there different ways to add additional supports to our Title I schools instead of this model? So, any questions on this? Yes.
Sorry I was late. Are there 37 Title I school teachers? Or no, I'm trying to do that math. How many Title I school teachers do we have?
I didn't count them. I just, I know I just didn't count them for this. I just downloaded all the teachers in Title I schools and took what their actual current salary was and then used that to develop these numbers.
Oh, so this isn't what it would cost for district?
Yes, this is.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if I did the math, if we gave teachers $10,000 and that additional cost is $33 million. Sorry, I'm trying to do that. Isn't that funny? In my head. Anyway,
mean, I've got the calculations on another sheet, I just.
Okay,
Looking at the math in that way, it would be about 362 teachers. But Alan is looking at it more specifically based on FTE. So some teachers are like 5, other very.
These are FTE.
Exactly. Would be my assumption, I'm not sure how.
Is that right?
So the stipends are FTE, the hourly rate, if you're paying every teacher 30 minutes, it's.
Everybody.
I think it's helpful to think about too, what you would try to accomplish by differentiating pay. So one thing that I think Grant has done with just $1,000, it's not going to change any behaviors. It's just a way of recognizing this job has complications that other schools don't, and we're going to recognize you as a teacher or an administrator in that role. So there is the idea that it's just a recognition of the different kind of role, maybe extra work that might be associated with that role. So that's one way to think about why you'd want to differentiate. The other ways we have up here are to think about, is there additional training that you'd want to provide in Title I schools? And that would be a way as well to bump up salary by paying for additional days. Another idea is to say, as many schools have said, there's not enough time in the day to teach all that needs to be taught in a Title I school. It's one of the reasons arts get squeezed, right? Is there just other pressures on the school day that way? And one of our challenges was fitting in a full arts program, or as much as we'd like, is the day. So if you extended the day, does it give you additional time to not squeeze? It gives you additional instructional time so you wouldn't be squeezing out other programs or limiting them in some ways. So that's why we wanted to lay out these different ways of thinking about increasing Title I salary. So in ways it depends what the board would want to accomplish with something like this in doing that.
When you move on, are we moving on to other ways to staff? Because I don't hear many asks for differentiated pay, but I hear a lot of asks for more people in the building.
Right, so this is actually our last slide. Now, talk amongst yourselves. So it really is, we kind of saw some models and some costs. As we look at supports for Title I schools, now I think it's open for board discussion of let's talk about what we've heard, what we may think, what we may want to further research. So,
Well, my question would be, we've talked in finance committee about the amount it would cost to make uniform Title I staffing. So more paras, for example, or not just more paras, but let's say the paras you have could be full-time. And those costs were loosely estimated. But how do you compare what we estimate in finance committee with this 3.7 for differentiated pay? Assume there's one bucket of money that's that amount. What could that cover, actually?
So an average teacher salary it's going to be in the low 80s plus benefits. You're looking $110,000 for someone on the teacher salary schedule. Parapro full time. I mean, if they took family benefits, the benefits alone are $20,000, and then the salary for a parapro is going to be another $20,000 to $30,000. So just for comparison, and is it more parapros? Is it other sorts of behavioral interventionists, or what does that look like? Yeah.
has anybody asked the Title I schools where their current needs are, or what would make a positive impact?
That's why I wanted to turn it to Bryce first, because he brought this
So
session to us in Charlotte. And Bryce, floor is yours.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. One of the things I was going to say, and I know I don't think everyone got the message, but we're going to actually have another study session next month. It talks a little bit more about these additional resources. This topic came up because I actually did visit with the teachers at Rose Park, and they've brought these things forward. And I don't want to speak for you, but if I remember correctly, we talked a lot more about resources, staffing, as opposed to planning time, in favor, as opposed to like differential salaries. So I think this is a good thing to talk about as an option, but I think in the conversations that we had, it was more about staffing as opposed to, and resources as opposed to And so that's kind of what we're here to.
And I think what we want to do, talk about it, develop it, discuss it, and then they determine if there's something we want to do, what that cost is, and then as we look to develop those revenue sources to do that, is that where we put current revenue sources and remove the resources from somewhere else, or through tax increases, enhance our revenue sources to address those?
Sure. And the one other thing I wanted to mention as well is one of the requests I put in, which my understanding is we'll talk about more in April, is talking a little bit more about the former family school collaboration specialist and whether something like that would make sense to bring back or not.
And I have heard from some teachers at Glendale Middle School that they would appreciate pay, additional pay to help keep them there and help keep them. They said they would appreciate that. So I didn't have a conversation with them though. They just asked specifically about the high performance, what is the incentive?
High performing teacher in high poverty schools.
Yes, it's from the state.
Yeah, so that's a program where the high performing teachers in let's say a Title I school, it's a state matching grant, so they provide a certain amount of money and then the district has to kick in the balance of that, those funds. And we currently and historically have not participated in that program, being largely due to the matching requirements.
The thing that keeps circling around in my head is basically putting together a survey that goes out to all the Title I schools, what's working well, what's not working well, what would they feel would make a difference on being able to provide what they need for the students and have the teachers feel supported so that they're not having turnover. But basically starting there, get the feedback from the stakeholders directly so that we can see what that data is bringing in versus us going darts at the board.
I think we have some of that because we know what they're spending their Title I money on. And we know what there's more demand for. And I feel like I am aware of this to some extent because both my kids have attended Title I elementary schools. And it is kind of the same things that come up again and again. I did pull up the number that you had estimated, Alan, about what it would cost to make more standardized staffing for Title I, and it was $3.6 million. So it's about equivalent to what this cost is, which is kind of interesting. And that came out to $210,000 per impacted school. What do you want to share, as a front load, what you thought that standardized staffing might include to see if it aligns with what people were hearing? Or is that too much?
I'm having a hard time remembering that conversation.
Because I think what happened is, if you go back to the slide, that's what people spend their Title I money on now. I think you can see it's not like a huge amount of things. But the other elephant in the room we're not discussing is what happens with Title I money, period.
Right, because it's been going down every year. Well, we had the COVID bump and now we're kind of going back to pre-COVID numbers.
So, if we look at what we would want to stabilize, it also has to be considered that it could be floating the status quo because Title I is not a guarantee, right? And it's less of a guarantee than ever before. So not only was the guarantee already going down, the floor is zero. And so this is the amount we're spending now. So the total of this, do you know the sum between those?
I think it's $4 million. And this is this year. So next year it's decreasing by several $100,000, our total Title I grant.
So perhaps one thing.
It's four-ish. I think our grant's $4 or $5 million for this year. I can't remember the exact number.
So perhaps one thing we need to consider is how, if there was a need for say $3.6 to $3.7 million, one example of how it could be used is differential pay. It doesn't sound like there's a huge appetite for that, although maybe there's some. It does sound like there's a big appetite for staff. We also know this could be going down. They need to somehow become balanced.
Right. Not lose ground.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think my original point is I think we know some of what people want because we know where they're choosing to prioritize the spending now. But the idea is it's just not enough of X. So it's not enough of behavior support. it's not enough of paraeducators, or those paraeducators don't make enough to stay, so you see massive churn of paras rather than a full-time person who's more likely to stay. So I think we do know the basic categories that people want to cover. We just aren't necessarily covering them.
But what we don't know is what they're not tapping into because they don't have the resources. Does that make sense?
Well, and that's the key to any discussion. Resources are limited. And so I think is have this discussion, determine, and then look at what the requests are, and then compare it to what are the needs across the district, what are our available resources, and then determine where the priorities are.
Yeah, one of the things I was, Amanda actually mentioned is I think that, you know, I've talked to a dozen teachers in one school. I think some sort of survey or assessment to kind of see where things are at or what folks' thoughts are is a good first step.
I just see that we have representatives of SLEA here, and I know they talk to teachers. So they could, can we ask them to give their feedback?
Public participating session.
Up to the microphone.
Thanks for the invitation to be here. I do think getting input from educators is going to be important, right? You're going to have different needs at different schools, and I agree. We see what a lot of them are utilizing, but because resources are limited, they oftentimes don't do that because we're focusing on these. But if there were resources, I think parents, we hear that a lot, they need additional people in buildings, right? And so I do think that's a great first step, is getting feedback from people who are most directly impacted by that, and then having those conversations. But I definitely think, you know, we do hear about differential pay a little bit, but by far and large, it's really about we need more people in buildings. We need our administrators in our buildings more, but we need more paras in our buildings, we need more teachers in our buildings, those kinds of things.
Hi, everyone. I can just speak as a Title I teacher at Glendale Middle, and I've been there for 10 years. I am more along the lines with Rose Park in that I just want to protect our planning time and the resources that we need for our students. We have so many ELD 1 newcomers. We have so many refugee students and others with trauma and generational poverty and gang violence and folks that are incarcerated and the undocumented. And I believe that if we had the mental health supports for that, I would also say, and I don't know how the funding works with a nurse. I mean, I just see how much time the front office and even I, as a health teacher and like first responder, how much time we spend on that. So for me, and I've only heard from 2 teachers at Glendale, and I've asked about the differential pay. I know one science teacher that probably spoke to you, Charlotte, because she just spoke to me this afternoon about it. And she's an incredible science teacher. And then our DLI teacher asked if there was any extra funding that was a non-core teacher kind of merit pay bonus system. But by and large, more hands-on in the building and a lot to do with the behavior. We are just seeing behaviors going up. And so for me, I'd rather spend our money on taking care of our students in that way, because if our students are taken care of, then our teachers are taken care of. And there's the vice versa piece, but that's just my own experience. Thank you.
I think that brings along the lines, you know, we hear more people, but it's more of the right people. And like was said, it might not be the same for each school. So I think as we study this, those are the things we need to figure out. What is it? Because a parent is a lot different than a behavior specialist, is a lot different than an English language learner, teacher, and a nurse and a psychologist. I mean, very different. So it's determining what those needs are, so we can model what the cost would be and make decisions going forward.
Question, maybe Margaret, for Logan, because I know we've been hearing this a lot, and I have over my years. You know, we made initiatives years ago to, you know, prioritize funding for more social workers and counselors, but we're also having a hard time filling, maintaining, and keeping those positions. And so some of that is still kind of sitting there. Kind of where are we at with this current school year with some of those initiatives that we took on, 4, 5, 6 years ago, compared to now, and how could that potentially be part of the equation, understanding what each individual school might need as far as those types of supports.
Sense it. So I want to understand your question specifically. You're saying, I think I'm a little confused because you alluded that we have funds but not positioned or people in those positions. I think it's actually the reverse issue, where we are staffed in the number of positions that we have available in terms of behavior specialists and counselors, psychologists in those positions.
I think
We don't have as much
social workers.
Social workers, we have, all our social worker positions are filled. So that hasn't been an issue in terms of getting those filled. It's having ongoing funding to have those positions continue on. We do have 5 plus an additional 2 for a total of 7 district social workers. Currently, all of those positions are full at the moment, and have been since we've started. I'm not always full, but that seems to be a position that we can fill relatively easily. So it's more about ongoing funding.
The perfect scenario that, I don't know if you remember, we sent out an email that Minnie Homedale applied for another grant that we can hire more social workers. Well, the opposite side is a grant that we had from the state that was also funding social workers is decreasing or even ending. So it's kind of like keeping that, we're having a hard time maintaining the status quo, let alone growing the resources. And some of the feedback I think we want to get, when we create these social worker programs that take turns at schools, is that model working? I mean, obviously it's always going to be better to have a full-time year dedicated to that school. But does it work that, you're at this school one day and at that school another day, or is that just maybe failing? And if it needs to really be more robust so that you're in this school and that's the school you're assigned to.
I have opinions about capacity building, but it's a good segue to the family and school collaboration. I don't know if you want to talk more about that. That when family and school collaboration specialists were discontinued, it was explained to me at the time that they had been capacity building positions, but that people were not moving from school to school. But there, at the same time, there was a real need for them to be in the school they were in. And it's not that we didn't need them because they weren't doing capacity building. It's that setting things up as capacity building is not working. There is no more capacity. Capacity has been reached. But we just need people to do the tasks. So do you have more you wanted to say about those specialists? I just don't know. That's a good example of where I think the idea we have X number and they go around does not work in certain roles. And family and school collaboration was one because there's not some lack of capacity at the school to collaborate with families. There's a lack of capacity to do that because you have all these other jobs to do, which is why planning time has come up. But there's still that need that exists at that school, and when a person leaves, then that just goes off of the table. So I think counselors, social workers, psychologists are another thing that having more time in buildings is a priority if we were to make a plan for expenses. I don't think it's good to put a lesser amount of money into something that we have kind of evidence does not play out very effectively.
Yeah, and I think the conversation, so, we used to not have a full counselor at every elementary. They split 0.5, but through board action, allocating more resources and state money, we do now fund a full. So I think those are the kind of conversations we need to keep having, because I think some of these are long-term discussions. This is where we want to be. We don't have the resources now, but how can we get there? And I think that's why it's important to keep having these conversations, especially along with budget and as we look at our tax rates and other revenue sources as well.
Can I just bring up so at elementary schools that have larger numbers, like say Mountain View. At Mountain View, it's the largest elementary school, right, in the district. And maybe we should have a ratio, you know, for a number of students, or how many counselors we have. So that they could have more, I mean, so that the students are served.
Yeah, you
They're
could
meant to
allocate them by the number of students rather than by each school.
And right now, it's by each school.
But when you're looking at that, you think, I mean, is there a bottom to
Yeah.
that? So do some schools possibly lose part of it because they fall below whatever your bottom allocation is?
Well,
things
we
to
would
talk
have a minimum.
Because we do
How
have
many-
some schools that are still quite small and some that are,
We could set some ranges that way, but.
How many counselors do we have at elementary schools right now?
it's one
Oh, one.
at all. And then
And
we have
the
some,
middle schools
we have a
are
few that'll use either Title I or their additional resources to have more, but we allocate one.
When you're asking about middle schools and high schools, those are allocated more on a per student basis. And so if you're saying three, that's not necessarily the case. Like inside Clayton have different numbers of counselors because of the student at those schools. And same with Bryant as well.
But our elementary schools are just one per school. Okay, well, I think we might need to look at more resources for the larger schools because if they're having a hard time meeting the needs of all their students.
And one of the things, just to add to that, I've talked about with some principals is that there's a significant difference between having 30% of a group of kids and 60%. Like if you have 30% of your school is learning English versus 60% of your school is learning English, it's actually quite a qualitative difference. Where we fund, it's on a linear, so the more kids, the more funding, more kids, the more funding. But then it's linear and it doesn't take into account the effect of just the quantity. And it almost is like it's more of a, yes.
What is that?
There's a
I
name
know
for
what
this.
you mean.
So that
Exponential.
Exponential,
that
yes.
it recognizes that difference.
Mhm.
And when you get that many kids, it comes with not just that many kids, but an expansion of needs around that many kids that's really quite different than 30, 40, or even 50% maybe. And it's hard to know where you'd change those funding cuts, but to think about those kinds of things too, because there are some schools where those numbers, particularly of English language learner students, are really quite high, and it changes the nature of what the school needs to provide.
And I just wanted to say again, as we have these discussions and look at these additional resources, we have two options. Cut resources from somewhere else to fund these, or increase our revenue. And both of those would be discussions that would be brought before the board to say, hey, we've surveyed our Title I schools, we've researched, we think this is the direction we should go. We need $2 million, $3 million, whatever million more dollars, or do you ramp it up over a couple of years? And that would be a discussion we'd ultimately bring back to the board. So I'm just saying, I can't just go to the money tree. As nice as that would be, right?
Well, I was thinking, have we fully explored private partnerships, corporations, and helping fill some of the gaps that will be coming with decreased Title I funding, or if, we are.
I mean, our foundation works a lot with donors and so forth. At the end of the day, there's just not a lot of people that are willing to come and just provide the resources for free. But the foundation does work on that.
The other challenge is just that kind of what we call soft money, or, philanthropic dollars or things like that are always very, you have different terms that they'll give to you for 2 years, but if you build up a school program over 2 years, then you have to essentially release those teachers after 2 years if you don't find the funding again. So it's really difficult to put in place long-term programs without long-term, sustainable, consistent funding. Otherwise, schools get in a real jam trying to run those programs consistently. So to do something like this where we're trying to think about how would we resource Title I schools differently, I think we'd want to do it in a way that we can be assured of the funding wherever it is.
That makes sense, yeah.
So I've noticed we're getting close to the hour. And what I'm hearing is that there seems to be an appetite for some type of survey or at least some kind of investigation in each of our Title I schools to understand the specific needs on a site-based level. I saw a lot of head nods from our Rose Park teachers and from Chelsea and Mike for providing their feedback as well. I guess Dr. Grant and Alan and Logan, do you all feel like you have enough information or direction potentially from this discussion to craft those types of surveys and outreach through maybe Dr. Taylor's department to not only survey but go out and also find some of the oral and spoken responses of what folks are dealing with on a daily basis so that they can be reported back to the board and we can make a more sound decision on how we would allocate those resources and what options we have if it's increasing our revenue or looking at other programs that might not be meeting their original outcome that we were looking for so that we can have a more substantive discussion about these types of allocations.
Yeah, I think what I like about this conversation is you always hear schools need more.
Mm-hmm.
But more what? And I think that's what we want to try and answer so we can have a definitive plan that we can bring before the board and say we've surveyed the schools, we've surveyed to see. It's not just throw more cash into it, it's more targeted. Here's what they need. They need a person that can do X, Y, or Z. So I think we have we've been talking about this for a while already to say what is the base model for staffing a Title I school? What's the base model for staffing a non-Title I school? We're having those discussions. It's just the answers aren't open up the handbook and find it. So it does take some time.
And to piggyback on that, one thing Alan said is, what is the appetite of the board to consider more funding for Title I schools? And getting your read on that a little bit. I mean, I'm catching something from your questions. But I think stating more definitively that there is an appetite for doing this helps us move forward in that direction and spend some time exploring what that might look like.
Bryce? Yeah. Or Mike's
I
thinking.
invited myself to the table. I love the idea of reaching out to schools. I just really hope that we make sure we include teachers in that. Oftentimes when it goes to school support, it doesn't get down to the teacher level. So making sure that when we're getting that feedback, that we're getting that from teachers as well.
Yeah, I think it should be administration. I mean, basically the whole school community, because you've got like your administration's perspective, you have your general staff's perspective, your teachers, you've got the families, and the students even can give input too. I mean, the whole array are really going to give us a better perspective. If it's limited, then we're siloing our conversation, which isn't the intent.
Yeah, what I was going to say is actually exactly what Mike said is one thing, but the second thing is I know we have another study session next month, and I'm wondering if we build upon that conversation next month before we send out a full survey or do any sort of assessments. I think part of what we're talking about later, some of it plays into that.
And possibly by next month, we'll have legislative estimates on what came out of the session. So we might see, is there, because they're increasing the at-risk funding. Problem is they're usually decreasing other money to increase that. But we should have those by then, possibly not, because they usually come out in April. And that can add to that conversation of, we might have some additional resources that we want to talk about immediately, and then the long-term plan as well.
We have 9 minutes left. The one part of this that I don't understand the barrier to necessarily is planning time. So most of the things we're talking about were personnel, but then there's this separate issue that was raised about planning time. And so I don't know if this is a question maybe for Logan, but like what would be the barriers in the existing agreement to planning time? Would that be the additional time in the day? Would it be carving out in an agreement protected time? Like, what are the barriers, other than the workload, to planning time that I may not be understanding?
We have carved out protections of during the school day planning time. Most of our schools, if not all of them, have early out on Fridays. So the barriers I can see being a couple things that get in the way of teachers potentially losing their planning time are the rotations for specials is really how planning time happens in an elementary school. So when students are scheduled to go to their PE or art or dance, whatever the BTS program is at an individual school, while students go to those specialized programs, even a lot of schools will have a computer lab. And so if students go to those different rotations, that's when teachers typically have their planning time during the day. If a school has a PE teacher who is out for whatever reason and they lose that, that can become a barrier in having planning time. But there should be dedicated planning time for educators in each of our schools on a regular basis.
I would just think the survey, keeping that in mind, with obviously this need for planning time being like amply expressed. I think the survey specifically what would go out to educators could include identification of like what prevents that now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just guessing that maybe there could be more input there is, you have your unique needs at a Title I school, and so instead of having that free planning time, they're maybe dealing with a behavioral issue or something else, and so that eats into that planning time. Because you can't just say, sorry, take your behavior to your specials right now.
Roger, can I follow up too on the request for the next one? So family school collaboratives, as I understood it when we chatted before, was that program had ended. The plan at that time was they were pushing the responsibility for funding that position back to schools. And they said, if you want to do this with your discretionary funding, and here's some ways to do it. Here's some good practices around family school collaboration. Your question, as I understood it, was, should the district be looking at funding family school collaboratives across schools?
Kind of.
Okay.
I wasn't necessarily thinking across, I mean, I kind of like that idea, but not necessarily across schools, but whether it's another 5 again or 10 or whatever it is, if the district should take that responsibility of funding those positions. Maybe I'm not
Yes,
answering.
so originally they were this goal of capacity building, that they'd be at some schools, you build up the capacity, and then they'd go around and build it up elsewhere. It turns out the need was great enough to keep people stuck in their schools. So, but your interest would just maybe the most impacted schools or something, or?
I'm open. I think I'm open. It was not necessarily. I think I specifically asked around family school collaboration, but I think my intent was more those resources pieces, the other things that we're talking about as well.
Okay, so just Title I funding generally, but you're thinking Title I schools in particular for a focus of that?
For that discussion, yes.
Okay, so just resources in general, and this question of, we've removed this resource from the district
Yes.
payments, and should we rethink that sort of allocation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'll be quick. So two pieces. From an educator perspective, when the survey is created, because I too am not positive what we can fund through Title I money. So my suggestion would be, when you create that survey for teachers, paras, office folks, community, give a brief blurb of what that is, and possibly the survey questions would be clicking on how they would prioritize, what those, because I don't know what the options are, with a comment box, of course, where they can add to. My concern would be that those of us that are not sure, and I'll go home and do my homework in 27 days when the referendum's over, I will read up on that, but that people would be adding in things that are not actually able to be funded through Title I funding.
Well, the advantage of funding it locally is it doesn't have those those strictures.
Okay, good to know.
So
Okay.
as Title I funding decreases, whatever we would fill in with or improve would be money that we could allocate in ways that the board could allocate.
Okay, good to
in ways
know.
The board thought important. So we become less encumbered by restrictions
Less
that way.
strings. Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to disregard your time or your energy or the people responding if it didn't match, right? And then my second one, just real quick on planning time. I think our concern with either shared governance going away, that time within our written agreement is going to still be protected. And I will say for myself, even though we have early out Fridays, my 1:30 to 2:30 time is told to me what I'm doing by my admin, that is not extra planning time. And Mondays are faculty meetings, and then like my own planning time on Wednesday, I have to meet with my ELD level 1 team with my district coach. So yes, we have planning time, but also more and more we're seeing that we're strongly suggested, encouraged, what's happening with my planning time. So I think that's just, and I personally am fine because we're learning Vista and the new ELD 1, but for other teachers, I want to respect that they're feeling a little of that planning time being infringed on. Thank you.
On that comment section note, I like the fact that there would be an organic way for people to kind of throw information out there, because I think that there's valuable things that are come off of those random input, whether or not we can apply it. But that's, when you structure something too, do you want a car, a motorcycle, or a bike? You miss out on the opportunity for a lot of other innovative ideas. I hope that we'll be able to look at that survey before it goes out.
Right, so feeling good about knowing Superintendent Alan Logan. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Go ahead and call this study session.